Good evening, everybody, and welcome to another session of Gather to Grow. I'm your host, Ador Numdu, and we do this weekly where we invite experts to share their knowledge, people in the industry to give you some insight to farming a specific commodity. And this week, we're talking about growing potatoes, tips for new farmers. And I must say, my panelists this evening are really in the know, and we are looking forward to getting all the information that we can from them. So I'm going to ask my guests to tell us a little bit about themselves. And I'm going to start with the Potato South Africa CEO, Willie Jacobs. Willie, welcome to Gather to Grow. It's great to have you with us.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here and also to be on something quite new for me. So apologies if I don't do it correctly.
I think you're doing it perfectly, Willie, and I don't think there's anything else I can teach you about Twitter Spaces. You're no longer a newbie. Siatia van der Merwe has joined me on this session before. He's from Aldri Boerdery. Siatia, great to have you with me again on this platform, and thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks, Dawn. Always a pleasure.
Thanks, Siatia. Now, in Mzansi, besides maize meal and bread, it's no doubt that we're a potato-eating nation. I think a Sunday plate isn't the same without a baked potato or fried potato or something potato. So let's kick off with an introduction to the potato industry in South Africa. Willie, can I just ask you just to set the scene and what the landscape looks like of the potato industry in Mzansi?
South Africa produces potatoes in 16 different areas. We are one of the only countries, actually I think the only country in the world that can have a fresh potato on a plate each day of the year, which is I think one of the specific, let's call it qualities of the South African industry that makes it quite unique. We produce potatoes obviously from up north, further north where Siete is, further down south up to the Sandveld area, KwaZulu-Natal, even down in the Eastern and Western Cape areas as well. Currently, we have about 50 to 55,000 hectares of potatoes in production on an annual basis, doing about 2.4 to 2.7 million tons, depending on the yield. And I think one of the things that makes South African potato producers stand out above the rest is that we probably have, on average, the highest yields per hectare than in most other countries in the world. Now, I'm just going to stop with that one for now, and then we can maybe have a few notes on that.
I think it's absolutely amazing. It actually makes me proud to be a South African, just looking at how we produce potatoes and how we compete, with the rest of the world. As I understand it, potato production is comparable to the US, Germany, and the Netherlands. How are we competing globally, especially when we think about exporting for new farmers who'd like to start producing this crop?
We've got a bit of a challenge with specifically the European producers. I've been at the World Potato Congress about a week or two ago. I actually saw the consumer prices that they have landed there. Their consumer prices and ours are relatively the same, but they still managed to land imported product into South Africa actually at a discounted rate. So that's quite a questionable practice. But in terms of our production capacity, I think Europe averages between, around 36 tons per hectare in terms of production. While in South Africa, we're well above the 40 tons per hectare, just to give you an idea. So production-wise, production capacity-wise, I also want to believe that we probably produce potatoes less costly than in other countries as well. I think this time around, with our rising electricity cost and also the fertilizer and chemical cost, might be turning things a little bit negative for the South African industry. But from what I hear, most of the world has been touched by the same circumstances. So I think in terms of comparable capacity to produce potatoes, South Africa is definitely up there. Just a little side note, we're probably one of the smaller producers country-wise of potatoes in the world. I don't think we make the top 25 list in terms of volumes. But what I can say is we're vastly larger than the Irish market, which is supposed to be the mecca of potatoes in the world. So perceptions is also something that needs to be followed in terms of the reality behind it as well.
Thanks, Willie, for that context. Now, you spoke briefly now about the regions where this crop thrives. Siete, what is the ideal climate? What should new farmers be thinking about?
What makes a potato awesome is that it's comfortable grower in most climate regions. It's very adaptable. Obviously, they are sensitive to frost. You need to be at least frost-free. But most of the potatoes that are currently harvested died off from the first frost in the beginning of June. And they will be harvesting those potatoes up to the end of August and beginning of September. So there's quite a vast expenditure of climate regions in South Africa that is adapted, or where growers have adapted the practices to get very good yield from very diverse types of climate. So as Willie mentioned, it's literally from up north, Limpopo, all the way down to the Sunveld Cape, where potatoes are grown.
Thanks for that. Now, seed potatoes aren't actually seeds, they are tubers. Could you maybe explain this, Vali? What happens when you want to think about growing? What should you be thinking about?
I must admit, I think Seti is probably the better expert, but I'm going to try my hand at that, Seti, if you can cover me on this one. So basically, a seed usually is something that grows from, let's call it, a male-female type of process, where you get basically your seed that goes dormant and it gets left and then regenerates the moment it gets planted. But when you work with plant material, you keep plant material alive. And although they call it seeding and they call it seed potatoes, it's actually a live piece of plant material that you keep on replanting. You can actually do quite a number of ways in terms of using potatoes to actually regenerate, to replant them themselves as well. People basically can actually create new plants from any part of the plant material of potatoes itself. It's just the potato itself, the smaller tubers, that are more practical to use, and they have got a specific, let's call it, nutritional quality within them that allows them to sprout faster, that allows them to grow faster and a stronger plant than anything else. And then the difficulty is potato seed usually doesn't stay true to its mother material. So once you've got a potato plant and it's got seed available, most of our potato plants I think are sterile at the moment, if I'm not mistaken, Setia. But if they can generate seeds from potatoes, those seeds will not have the same qualities as the parent plant. And that's also the reason why we use potato tubers. So it's actually the last piece of the old plant material that you keep replanting to create the same plant with the same characteristics and with the same qualities as well.
Thanks, Vali. Now, Siti, maybe you can just add on that and maybe also answer the question in terms of costing. If you're repurposing, what are the costing involved for these tubers or for your seeds or starters in that way?
Just to elaborate a little bit on what Willie said about this physical seeds, there's a lot of research being done to produce physical seeds from potatoes, but I think the vigor that you get from a tuber is much better than from a seed. Until now, it's not competitive in the market to plant seed. So the tubers that are planted is then called potato seed, is produced in South Africa through generations. So usually you would call, or what most consumers would eat would be on average usually a generation 4 to 5 tuber. So that means that it's first produced in a lab where from a sprout with the original variety characteristics, and then from that lab the plants are planted out into a greenhouse, and that greenhouse then produced the first generation, which you call generation 1. So that's the first generation. And then that's multiplied and multiplied and multiplied up until generation 4 or 5, which is then consumed. The cost differs from the first generation. If you buy that first generation, you pay on average about 5 Rand per tuber, which is very expensive. And that tuber is the size of your thumbnail, basically, up until 100 or 150 grams. And each one of those are at a cost of 5 Rand. So basically a 5 kilogram of those small seed tubers can be up to 1,000 Rand. And so it's very, very expensive on the first generation, but the cost come down. And that's why the commercial potatoes that are grown, we plant between generation 4 and 5 for that. And the cost on your total cost is about 25% of your total cost, more or less.
And when it comes to you sort of planting or purchasing these seeds, maybe we can start with where to buy them and then how to plant them. And then my next question will also be around soil. But let's talk about where in South Africa, if I'm a new farmer, if I'm looking to start growing potatoes, who do I go to?
Well, there's a couple of seed houses or organizations that have plant breeders' rights. And they also then, even if the plant breeders' rights has expired, they still grow those seed. And that's usually where you can buy your seed. So there's a couple of companies in South Africa. I think the biggest is Westgrow. That is, head office is in Christiana in the Western Free State. And then there's RSA, ANSA, FPD, Xylem. That's basically the companies where you can buy your seed. But if you want to do it on a small scale, you should just maybe try to go directly to a farmer that grows seed and ask him for a couple of bags just to test it out. If you want to do it on small scale, if you want to do it commercially and professionally, those are the companies that you should get your seed from. Just to add on that, I think South Africa's seed certification service is really one of the best in the world. So if you buy seed from one of those seed houses or seed organizations, you are definitely, you can rest assured that you would get good quality seed.
Thanks so much, Siete. Now, so between Siete and Willie, I hope that you'll be able to answer all my questions tonight. So when it comes to soil type, what's the best soil type? And also, as I understand it, potatoes are quite susceptible to soil-borne rots, viruses, and pests. What should farmers be aware of? Siete, can you maybe take this one, and then I'll also get Willie's take on it?
Yeah, you have to rotate the fields that you grow your potatoes on. It differs on what the climate is and how much rainfall is, and there's a lot of factors. But I think as a rule of thumb, 5 years is a safe time from when you planted potatoes on soil to get back to that specific field to plant potatoes on it again because of soil-bearing diseases. But regarding soil type, I think there's a lot of opinions on that. For me personally, we like heavier soil for seed production. So we like to produce our seed on heavy soil. That usually brings forth the best quality seed, but that's just our personal opinion. And then for a commercial production, a loam with about, let's say, 10 to 8% clay percentage would be a nice soil for us for commercial. But we grow potatoes on sandy soils, on heavy clay soils. There's really no limit.
Thanks, Siete. I see Mavuso is with us. Mavuso, maybe you can just tell us a little bit about your farming operation, where you're based, and maybe just to respond to the question around, what the best soil you think is to grow potatoes in and how you operate in terms of your production.
Greetings, everyone. My name is Mavuso Tanehelo. I'm from Eastern Free State. In Harrismith, I'm a small farmer producing potatoes. I'm just listening to CT and Vili. I'm just learning a few things there. What I just want to add, especially on buying potato seed, what I've noticed, you have to know your region. Are you based? Because when you buy seeds, you can't just go to the store and buy seeds. You just have to book them first. You book them and they prepare it for you maybe a couple of months, 4 months before you plant. You just can't just go to the shop and buy your seeds. You need to make proper arrangement with your salesman or saleswoman. Then they will book for your seeds. Then you will know when is the opening plant for your potatoes. Then you will start to plant. I just want to add on the previous question that you asked.
Thank you so much, Mavuso. I think the amazing thing about this platform is that people can come producing on any scale and share knowledge and get knowledge. That's why I love this space so much. One question was around the type of viruses or pests that you deal with. Maybe you can speak about your experience as farmers, Siete or Mavuso, in terms of what farmers usually deal with. I've heard, for example, we've spoken about on our weekly farmers podcast about early blight in potatoes, which is a common threat. What should new farmers be aware of? And is it easy to sort of identify and deal with? What should farmers be aware of in that regard? Siete?
From my side, what Mavuso said regarding where you are would make a huge difference. We grow potatoes in the Northern Cape, Eastern Transvaal or Mpumalanga, and in Limpopo. And for instance, in Limpopo, we don't struggle with any fungal diseases, where in Mpumalanga, that's a huge issue, and even in the Northern Cape. In Limpopo, we also don't have issues with things like nematode, and in Mpumalanga, we don't have issues with nematodes at all. But we have huge issues in the Northern Cape with nematodes. With leaf miner, we don't struggle in Mpumalanga with leaf miner, but in Limpopo, it's a huge issue. It's going to depend on your region, and I'd say the best way is to go to a neighboring farmer that's already growing potatoes, or otherwise go to a representative of any chemical company, and they would be definitely able to assist.
Thanks, Siete. Vale, maybe you can also just add on this question. What are some of the farmers in your network? What do they deal with, and sort of ways of coping or mitigating even before it happens?
The important thing especially for our small farmers or aspirant farmers to consider, is to get themselves acquainted with a network of potato producers in their local area as soon as possible. As Yeti has mentioned, there are farm-specific issues, and you also have to know the history of the area that you've been planting, who has been planting in the vicinity, and what they've experienced as well. If I can maybe extend an invite, we've got the transformation division that's got specialists, that's got also mentors that are quite well versed with certain areas. If you've got any question with regards to that, rather make contact with Potato South Africa, either through our website or just use the phone and call our number and find out who's the most local person that you can be referred to. Our network of commercial farmers, as you know, with CT as well, are quite well prepared to be able to advise you on the specific area and your requirements that you're looking for. But we have got a research division within Potato South Africa that is spending significant amount of money on specific research on diseases and pest control specifically. So to take you through a list of the elements that can actually influence your farm in a certain area is going to take quite a substantial amount of time. Most important thing is familiarize yourself with people in the area that can give you the best advice in terms of what to look out for.
Thanks, Vali, for that support. And I think Potato South Africa does amazing work. I see we have one of our listeners who would like to contribute. Lord Star, would you like to ask a question? Maybe ask any of our experts anything? The floor is yours.
Actually, my name is Kekana here. Actually, I just wanted, maybe we can have a proper clarity in as far as the soil properties are concerned, because understand potatoes are tubers. So if you are planting on a heavy soil, say a soil with 80% clay percentages, really that should be alarming. Because normally during harvesting, we find that it becomes a very challenge. Perhaps maybe you can get a proper guide as to which clay percentages is safe for potato production. Looking at the yield potential of each clay percentages, maybe it can be a better guide on that regard. Because so far, I'm still not sure which soil properties is best, and then I would like to know about it.
Thanks, Kekana. Setia Mavuso, would you maybe like to respond to that question? I think we covered it a bit, but maybe just for clarity for this farmer.
In my opinion, there's no perfect clay percentages. You're just going to have to manage it differently. And obviously, if you have a very high clay percentage, you're going to struggle with mechanical harvesting and so forth. Then you must be prepared to do it all the way labor intensive with people picking up the potatoes by hand. If you're prepared for that, then it's just the aspect of how you manage your irrigation and your fertilizer. And there's not a perfect clay percentage, in my opinion.
Thanks, Yetema. So maybe you can talk about your experience planting, just to advise the farmer as well.
We can say there's a specific clay percentage where you can plant, but what I normally do, I just do on a sandy loam soil that I'm using, because here in Eastern Free State, we have sandy loam soil. And again, potatoes, they need something like sandy close soil there, because for expansion and to grow very well, to have those big size potatoes you need. So if you have that clay soil, it will be difficult, especially for your mechanization. You will have a big problem when you harvest your potatoes. You're going to struggle. So can't say what's the percentage. What you have to do, you have to work your land your soil to be soft enough so that your potatoes can grow very well.
Thanks, Mavuso. Let's talk about growth period from seed to harvesting. Maybe we can just go step by step for new farmers in the space. Setia, I'm going to give you this one, and then I'm going to ask Vali and Mavuso to comment if there's anything that they'd like to add as well.
Well, varieties has a huge influence. You have short growers and longer growers. The average is about 120, or let's say 110 to 140 days, if I'm not mistaken. I might be a day or two out. But that's from planting to harvesting. And another factor is the maturity of your seed. If you have fresh seed, it's going to take a longer period of time to germinate. So whatever that time is, it would extend your total growth period. And if you're using much more mature seed, it would obviously make it a bit shorter. But that's on average between 110 and 140 days.
Thanks, Yetema. Mavuso, has this been your experience as well, growing depending on your cultivar?
When you get your seed from the company, what I do, I store my seed for 2 weeks before I plant them to get those little sprout. When I plant, I know after 2 weeks, they will emerge. And again, when you buy seeds, you need to know who needs those potatoes. Here in Harrismith, we stay in rural areas. So most of the people, they use those potatoes for chips and mash. So you need to know the cultivar that you're going to use, or the cultivar that people need, and the dates. You need the short or the longer or the medium growth. So that's what I use.
Thanks, Mavuso. Now, in terms of planting and harvesting, is it very labor intensive, and what type of machinery or equipment is needed, depending obviously also on what scale you farm? Vali, I don't know if I can pass this one to you. I know that you maybe want to give more of the broader perspectives, but maybe you can take this one.
It really depends on the scale at which you farm. It also depends on the quality of the soil. I just wanted to make a remark maybe, and also the conversations about the soil quality and those type of things. I'm a little bit curious about those questions because sometimes it's more a situation of you are dealt with a deck of cards that you have. If you've got a specific piece of land, you need to understand how to manage that land, whether it can carry potatoes or not. And then what you need to do if it carries the potatoes. But to take it to the concept of what is required, it's probably the biggest difficulty for farmers to really become commercial to a large extent is the equipment that you need to be able to lift the potatoes. What we do in the small scale projects, we really do a lot of manual work. And there are smaller pieces of equipment that's also available to do that. But I think the most important thing is you need to understand at what scale you're going to operate. The biggest warning that you will have is not to try to overcapitalize your process from the start. Rather work with the best possible low capital process, maybe use as much as possible labor from the start until you understand what your requirements are and then build out from there instead of trying to understand what your mechanization should look like at the end of the day immediately.
Setia, maybe you can speak on a commercial level type of machinery that you use, the commercial farmers in this space, or newly commercialized farmers who'd like to go into producing potatoes. And then Mavuso, you can speak on a smaller scale and how you operate.
It's a costly production or costly type of farming to get into if you want to do it on a large scale, and you need a bit of infrastructure, especially if you want to wash the potatoes as well. There is a growing market for unwashed potatoes for the neighboring countries, especially going out to Mozambique. Obviously, that's making it a bit easier. I think there's a huge potential in the local economy, especially in the informal market. If we could just maybe have a bit more focus from government side to look after our fresh produce markets. And we've sent some unwashed potatoes to the fresh produce market, and it did pretty well. You have to ask yourself, what is the scale? What is the direction you want to go into? Do you want to wash? Is it fine not to wash and to sell it unwashed? And then also what type of soil you have. We are quite comfortable. We still harvest in the traditional method of just lifting it out of soil and labor picking the potatoes up. In this way, we generating employment, and it still is for us more effective in the types of soil that we have. Big automated lifting material. There's really awesome and very expensive machinery that you can condition your soil beforehand, remove stones and plant in the destoned soil, and then just come lift the potatoes with a tractor. And even some of the lifts is fully automated, like almost like grain harvester. And then you fill it up onto a trailer. The trailer takes it to the back house. So it depends on what's your budget and what's the market you're targeting, and obviously the type of soil you have.
Thanks, Setia. So there obviously are a lot of technological advances to be able to do that. But like you say, a lot of farmers opt to still do it manually. Mavuso, is this how you operate as well? How does it work for you in terms of your operation?
If you have capital or if you have invested in machinery, you can buy those big machines he was talking about, but they are quite expensive. But we are small growers. I'm using 2 single harvesters, single lifters. They dig potatoes under the ground, then they put them on top of the ground. So you will need people to take those potatoes on top of the ground, put them onto different bags, 1,000 kg or 30 kgs. Again, you will need people on a washing potato line at the pack house. Currently, I'm using 60 people, 20 people on the machine, then 40 on the field. You need to work on your budget, know your budget, work as soon as possible to cover that budget, because on Limpopo side, they are selling unwashed potatoes. That one is best to sell unwashed potatoes because it reduces those labor costs for the washing machine packhouse guys. If you use those machines, you need to have capital. If you're a small grower, you don't have that capital, so you have to work with hands, and hence the cost. You'll need more people to work for you, so you need to work on your budget, see how much you can start with, then see how's your production, then how's your selling in return, because we don't farm to make loss, we farm to make profit.
Thank you so much for that. Lots of great context and lots of experience from our farmers in this space. We spoke now briefly, last speakers have alluded to the fact that moving into what does our local market look like and unwashed potatoes. But let's talk about some of the challenges. What is the experience of farmers? What are the industry challenges and how can we think about solutions to overcome it? Veli, maybe you can take it and then I'll give space to our other speakers as well.
The CT has alluded to that in terms of what the capital requirements are for a farmer to actually to sell fresh potatoes or to sell washed potatoes. I would want to say the barriers to entry remain the capital required to do that. The difficulty is also to find a market that doesn't require that, and we've got very limited space in terms of the processing area where there are actually companies that can buy, let's call it the product in bulk off your farm. And mostly what we do is we suggest to the guys that want to start to maybe go that route. They've also got incentives to bring on smaller farmers onto their programs as well. So firstly, to be able to get your product to a market without having to spend too much capital, your first issue will be is to try to get somebody that can actually come and take it off your farm at bulk and without probably needing to be washed as well.
Thanks, Veli. Siti, maybe some of the challenges that you face with this specific crop?
The biggest challenge would be to, specifically market-wise, is the municipal markets that is not maintained properly. I think we're losing a lot of potential there. The amount of potatoes going around the market that is not sold on the market anymore because of the lack of maintenance on the infrastructure is actually putting a downward pressure on not only potatoes but on vegetables in general and even fruit for that matter. But I think the rising costs in general is a big concern for not only for potatoes but vegetables in general. It's getting harder and harder to make a meaningful profit, and the only way that you can still sustain that profit, you have to expand and plant more hectares, because the rate at which we innovate to get better yields, at the rate at which the price that we get for potatoes increase is not keeping up with the rising cost of inputs. I think that's the biggest concern.
Thanks, Yatir. Avuso, I think earlier our speakers was referring to the informal market. What is your take on that? And specifically, finding a way to penetrate it as a small-scale farmer. What should farmers be thinking about?
Yeah, market is a problem. And the competition also is a problem. As a small-scale farmer, you're competing with the commercial farmers because you want to sell your product to fresh market. So they will compare your product and that commercial farmer product. You will see the difference. So if you can get someone who can come to your farm and take all your product and sell it, then penetrating market is not simple, but we are still trying. Sometimes you can go street market. That one is working for me because I don't take my potatoes to big fresh markets. I sell it locally, street markets. I'm controlling the price. But if I take my potatoes to Joburg market, they will tell me what's the price. So sometimes, just like now, Limpopo and KZN, they can produce potatoes like throughout the year. But here in Free State, we have frost. There's a time to plant, there's a time to harvest. When you harvest, Limpopo and KZN, they're already in the market. You'll have to join them. And the supply and demand. The supply is there. You are adding on the supply. And the demand, if the demand go down, the supply is too high, the price will go down. So you'll have to go down with the price. So we found difficult if the price goes down because you won't get that profit you were expecting to get. So marketing your potatoes is not a simple. We are trying to penetrate, then we will get there.
Thank you so much for that. Robert, I see you've clicked the mic. Would you like to ask a question to our speakers?
Yes, thank you. Now, my question is simple, and you mentioned it, but I just said that let me just ask. How is the market for potatoes in South Africa? Is South Africa sufficient in the potatoes they produce, or do they import from outside?
Thanks so much. Maybe Veli could take this one. shed some context in the beginning in terms of our scale and our outlook?
I had a very funny remark from my previous information manager when I asked him how much potatoes are we selling per annum. His answer was everything. And I think to a large extent, as I've mentioned earlier, we've managed to produce up 2.7, 2.8 million tons of potatoes in certain years. And it all was sold. That's where the prices were recorded. The question would remain whether we would be able to make it seasonally. And I think that's the biggest issue. It's not really the concern about the ability of the market to take off what we produce. But typically there are in seasons, and then when you've got an overproduction in a specific point in time, that can actually have a deterring effect on the price itself. Currently, South Africa is importing potatoes. I think I've mentioned that in terms of the context on dumping and the anti-dumping regulations that we're trying to deal with. But I will assure you that we will definitely be able to have a full potato security in terms of South African production if the market keeps itself stable in the process.
Thanks so much, Willie. I think we've covered a lot of ground. My final question would just be in terms of outlook on the industry and growth trajectory. What do our speakers foresee? What does the industry kind of look like in the next 5 to 10 years? Should the farmers in the space be considering it as a crop to diversify with? On a small scale, what should we be thinking about? Mavuso, maybe you can take this one first.
For a long run, working with potatoes is a nice commodity to work with. It's a profitable commodity. Even if it's expensive for input production, it's very, very expensive. Most of the farmers, they're scared of going or spending that much. So what I'll encourage them is to concentrate on maybe producing potatoes, because we eat potatoes every day. So producing potatoes is a nice thing.
Thank you so much. I think there's a champion for you here, Vali, in terms of producers who's really proud of producing this specific crop. Siete, maybe you can just give your take. I know this is not the only crop you produce, but just in terms of, sustainability of the industry and you continuing as a farmer as well.
With grain prices being as good as it is at this stage, it's definitely a lower risk to go into grain production, especially if you're starting from scratch. But regarding vegetables, in my opinion, potatoes is definitely the best option still, specifically looking at vegetables. If you're looking at any alternative to grow, for starters, I think at the current grain prices, it would definitely be a better option to go into grain, since it's not that capital intensive and you don't need the infrastructure that is required for potato production.
Thanks, Siete. Vali, the last word is yours.
I think Siete wants to get people not to plant that much potatoes so that we can get the price up. But the reality of the situation is, and I think he described it the best the last time we sat in the PMA conference, is that we have to always consider supply and demand. The difficulty in which things can happen at the moment. I think if you want to commit to potatoes, you have to remain committed. That's the most important thing. You can't go in and out the whole time into the market, because what you're going to do is you're going to catch the cycles on the bottom end every time if you do that. So the most important thing is, if you want to get into potatoes, stay there and go with the flow and try to manage the, let's call it the risky parts or the lower profit parts the best you can.
Thank you so much to our speakers. Thank you so much to our listeners for joining us this evening. I appreciate you being here. Thank you so much to everyone who contributed, our listeners who engaged with us as well. Have a lovely evening further.